It is October the 9th, 1967. Ernesto Che Guevara, the world's most recognized revolutionary, waits for the sound of a single gunshot that will end his life. Outside, the Bolivian army, trained and guided by American intelligence, has achieved what entire governments failed to do: capture the man who believed he could ignite revolution across continents. But this moment didn't begin here, in a forgotten village called La Higuera. It began almost 4 decades earlier, in a small Argentine town, with a child who carried both compassion and fury in equal measure. The world Che was born into was marked by instability. Argentina in the late 1920s was modernizing fast, yet social inequality ran deep. The Guevaras were not poor, but they weren't immune to hardship. Ernesto's childhood asthma, so severe it nearly killed him, forced him indoors into a world of thought rather than play. Asthma would shadow him for life, but it also taught him endurance. Each attack a battle, each breath a small victory. Perhaps that was where the seeds of defiance first took root. He was a boy both grounded in reality and lost in ideas. Friends remembered him as thoughtful but intense, often withdrawn, as if already measuring the world against an invisible standard. At the University of Buenos Aires, he pursued medicine, determined to understand human suffering through science. But soon the boundaries of textbooks felt too small. Argentina's post-war politics were turbulent. Juan Perón had risen to power, blending nationalism with populism. Che watched, skeptical of both the elites and the authoritarian tone growing around them. He once wrote that the life of a single human being is worth more than all the property of the richest man on earth. A thought that, in time, would turn from empathy into revolution. In 1951, Che embarked on a journey that would transform him. With Grando, a biochemist and friend, he set off across South America on a leaky Norton 500 motorcycle, hoping to see the continent, not through headlines but through its scars. What he found was not the romantic landscape of explorers' tales. He found miners living in hunger, lepers isolated from society, peasants stripped of dignity. It was a journey through the anatomy of a continent's inequality. Each encounter carved something into him. The doctor's gaze shifted, from curing the body to curing the world. He began to believe that poverty wasn't a disease to treat, but a system to destroy. The gesture was simple but symbolic. For him, equality was not an idea to debate. It had to be lived, even in risk. In those humid nights by the Amazon, the young doctor began writing what would later become the Motorcycle Diaries. Its pages reveal not a revolutionary yet, but a man awakening to the scale of injustice and realizing that healing alone would never be enough. By the time he returned home in 1952, the traveller who left Argentina was gone. In his place stood a man restless with purpose, convinced that compassion without action was surrender. The world was vast, wounded and waiting, and Ernesto Guevara de la Serna, soon to be known simply as Che, was ready to find his war. By 1953, Che had graduated as a doctor, but he never settled into the life of one. The world outside his borders called to him. Latin America was boiling with change. Governments rising and falling, workers striking, foreign corporations tightening their grip. His journey led him to Guatemala, where President Jacobo Arbenz was attempting something unprecedented: land reform. For the first time, a Latin American leader tried to redistribute unused land from corporations like the United Fruit Company to poor farmers. It was here that Che Guevara began to see how revolution worked in practice, and how foreign power worked against it. The CIA, under the banner of anti-communism, viewed Arbenz's reforms as a threat to American business interests. In 1954, the United States backed a coup. Bombs fell over Guatemala City. Arbenz was forced to resign. It was a turning point. He saw a democratic attempt at reform crushed not by its people, but by empire. And he drew one conclusion: true change could not come peacefully. When the coup succeeded, Che escaped through the embassies, narrowly avoiding arrest. He became a refugee in Mexico, a country that would soon shape the rest of his life. In the smoky corners of the capital, he met men who spoke of revolution not as theory, but as destiny. Among them was a young lawyer from Cuba, recently freed from prison after a failed attack on a military barracks, the Moncada Barracks. His name was Fidel Castro. For Che, it was the moment where his ideals met a cause. Cuba was the stage, Castro, the leader, but Che would become the soul of the movement. In those cramped rooms, Guevara's transformation from doctor to revolutionary soldier began. He trained, studied guerrilla tactics, and took an oath of loyalty to the Cuban cause. One night, he writes in his journal, "I knew that when the boat sails for Cuba, if I go, it will be to fight and to win or die." The Gramma wasn't built for war. It could barely carry half its passengers. But aboard that leaking vessel were the beginnings of a revolution that would shake the world. After 7 days at sea, battered and lost, they finally reached Cuba's southern coast. What awaited them wasn't glory, it was disaster. From a failed landing came a new beginning. The survivors, among them Castro, Raúl and Che, disappeared into the Sierra Maestra Mountains. There, they began building what would become the Cuban Revolution. In the mountains, Che's leadership emerged naturally. Despite constant asthma attacks, he refused special treatment. He treated the wounded, read Marx by candlelight, and fought alongside the others. To him, revolution required purity. Any betrayal, no matter how small, was a threat to all. The doctor had now become the executioner. As months passed, the rebels gained territory and trust. Che led one of the key offensives, marching through the Cuban countryside, recruiting locals and defeating Batista's forces in battle after battle. Santa Clara was the turning point. With the fall of the city, Batista fled Cuba. On January 1st, 1959, the revolution had won. The doctor from Argentina had become a hero of Cuba, but in victory he saw not rest, but responsibility. The revolution, he believed, was only beginning.
Hoy aprovecho la oportunidad de la visita de un periodista cubano para dar al pueblo de Cuba el primer saludo que tengo oportunidad de dar. De un pueblo que he decidido defender, conociendo solamente a través de la acción y del pensamiento de nuestro jefe Fidel Castro.
Cuba was free. The tyrant Batista had fled. For the first time in modern Latin America, a socialist revolution had triumphed on the doorstep of the United States, and in the middle of it stood Che Guevara, no longer the wandering doctor, but a man history could no longer ignore. After the revolution, the victors divided their responsibilities. Fidel Castro became the political leader, the voice, the strategist. Che, however, became the conscience. His idealism ran deeper, his expectations harsher, his faith in the purity of revolution unyielding. He wanted to reshape Cuba's economy from the ground up. He rejected material incentives, believing work should be driven by moral conviction, not greed. It was an experiment in building a new kind of human being, one defined by sacrifice. Che's dream collided with reality. His push for rapid industrialization failed. Cuba, dependent on sugar exports, faced shortages. Yet Che refused compromise. He said, "We are not concerned with economic indicators. We are concerned with human transformation." In the United States, alarm bells rang. The Eisenhower administration saw Cuba as a domino, the first to fall to communism in the Western Hemisphere. The CIA launched covert plans to destroy it from within. In 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion began, a CIA-backed attempt to overthrow Castro's government using Cuban exiles. It ended in disaster. The rebels were crushed within 72 hours. For Washington, it was an embarrassment. For Che, a vindication. He believed this proved his conviction, that the United States would never tolerate a truly independent Latin America. He warned that revolution must be defended not by diplomacy, but by arms. The Cold War reached its peak when Soviet missiles arrived in Cuba. The world stood one misstep away from nuclear annihilation. Che, unshaken, called for defiance. Later, in an interview, he said, "If the missiles had remained, we would have used them against the very heart of the United States." To the Soviets, he was dangerous. To Washington, he was fanatical. To himself, he was a revolutionary willing to die for his ideals. When Khrushchev and Kennedy reached a secret agreement to withdraw the missiles, Che felt betrayed. He saw it as proof that Cuba's independence was still in the hands of superpowers. His faith in the Soviet Union fractured. He began to view Moscow as a new empire, an oppressor in red clothing.
Industries of Cuba. I invite him to address the Assembly.
In December 1964, Che Guevara addressed the world from the United Nations. His voice, calm yet defiant, echoed across the chamber. We must walk the path of liberation, even if it costs us millions of atomic victims. He condemned US intervention, colonialism, and the silence of nations who called themselves free.
Encabezado por la Unión Soviética. Esa proclama es patria o muerte.
In April 1965, Che disappeared from public life. In a letter left behind, he wrote, "Other nations are calling for my modest efforts. I am conscious of the part I have been assigned in this world, to fight wherever tyranny exists." He vanished into Africa, first to the Congo, where he tried to ignite rebellion against Western-backed regimes. The jungles were unfamiliar, the fighters disorganized, the mission doomed, the campaign failed. Disease, division, and lack of support crushed his dream of a continental revolution. Yet Che's faith didn't die. He believed failure was only a lesson. By late 1966, Che appeared in Bolivia under a false identity, Ramon Benitez. His mission, to spark revolution across South America, beginning with the heart of the continent. But Bolivia wasn't Cuba. The peasants feared him, not followed him. The Communist Party refused his leadership. The CIA was watching. By 1967, the CIA had built an extensive network in Latin America. They supplied the Bolivian army, intercepted rebel communications, and even trained counterinsurgency units through US Green Berets. Among their advisors was Felix Rodriguez, a Cuban exile and CIA operative, tasked with capturing Guevara alive. By October, the hunt was closing in. Che's group, starving and sick, was surrounded near the village of La Higuera. Bolivian troops advanced through thick brush. Gunfire echoes. Che, wounded, his rifle jammed, shouts, "Don't shoot! I'm Che Guevara. I'm worth more to you alive." Captured alive, he was taken to a small schoolhouse in La Higuera. The CIA interrogated him, documenting every word. When Washington was informed, they left the decision to Bolivia. A Bolivian sergeant enters the room. Che sits on a bench, calm, hands tied. He says quietly, "Shoot, coward. You're only going to kill a man." At 1:10 p.m., October 9, 1967, Ernesto Che Guevara was executed. His body was flown to Valle Grande, displayed to reporters as proof of victory. For the CIA, it was the end of a threat. For Cuba, the loss of a brother. For the world, the birth of a myth. Che's image became something no bullet could destroy. It spread across continents, from university walls to war zones. His face turned into a symbol of rebellion, often stripped of its meaning, reshaped to fit the dreams of others. But was he a hero or a villain? A liberator or an executioner? The answer depends on which side of history you stand. What began as a journey across South America ended as a legend written in blood and belief. To some, Che Guevara was the conscience of the oppressed. To others, he was the hand of tyranny. Either way, his revolution never truly died. It still breathes quietly wherever people dream of changing the world.